So when you look at your panel, there's a little bubble. That's the chat window, and you can enter a message in there that will show up for everyone, or you can choose to send it to me in a drop down. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation from the state's recycling office, which includes myself, Mel, and Sandy. Then we're going to hear from some partners in Sunoco Recycling, the material recovery facility that serves this region. Kevin's going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. So if you have a question for anyone speaking, and if you hear anything, pop it in that chat box, and then I'll be going through that, coming through and picking out some very salient questions for the audience at the end of the presentations. So let's go ahead and get started. I see 25 people are on. We might have a few more trickle in, but I wanted to just turn things over to a familiar face for everyone. Mickey Bozeman, if you want to just say hi, because you did such a great job of getting everybody to the table today.
Thanks, Matt. So I just wanted to jump on real quick and welcome everyone. Those that don't know me, I'm Mickey Bozeman. I'm the Solid Waste and Recycling Coordinator here in Brunswick County. And just brag on these guys a little bit. We got a great lineup of presenters, and we hope that you'll find this information informative and helpful when speaking to the public and making decisions on recycling. And with that, I will turn it back over to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. Appreciate that. And you've done such an amazing job in Brunswick County for many years now, and we're gonna brag on you a little bit further along in the presentation on some work that you've done. But my last reminder to everyone would be if you can press the mute button. It's like a little microphone looking thing when you're not speaking, just so we kind of minimize background noise. But thanks, Mickey. We're really happy to have this opportunity, and thanks to you.
Thank you.
So a little bit about who we are, we being myself, Mel, and Sandy. We are the state's recycling program. We work for the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality in Raleigh. So we work for the state government, and what we do is non-regulatory. We're not enforcers. We just are here to help. And we work with local governments that do recycling, so counties like Brunswick and municipalities within them that have recycling routes. We work with them. And we also work with the businesses that pick up your recycling and make them into new products. So the manufacturing side of that, we work with them too. So we do technical assistance, advice, basically. We offer grants, studies, data, and report. And so that's kind of our role here today, is just kind of offering what we know about the recycling industry with the state and some economics about it. So we just wanted to start off very broad, thinking about why we're even having this conversation to begin with. Why is recycling important? And I'd be the first to acknowledge that recycling takes time and effort and money to get right, but it's a worthwhile endeavor for a number of reasons, both environmentally and economically. We're going to take a look at both. So on the environmental side of things, when we recycle, it's what we learn as kids. When we recycle, we're conserving resources for future generations to use. When we recycle office paper or cardboard, those are trees that we don't need to cut down. So it doesn't make sense to take something from the earth, use it once, and then throw it away where we'll never use it ever again. So conserving natural resources being first and foremost, and then the energy that it takes to recycle it's much lower. When you have to mine new materials, there's a lot of gas that goes into that. A lot of fossil fuels are burned whenever we need to extract raw materials from the earth. And when we recycle, we reduce that need. And the same during the manufacturing process. When we use recycled material in building new products, it's much less energy needed to make that happen. Like when you're making a glass cullet, you don't need to get the furnaces hot if it's already a recycled product instead of a virgin raw material. And lastly, recycling is good to conserve our landfill space, because airspace in a landfill is a very hot commodity. They fill up faster than we want, and then once a landfill is filled up, we have to manage that kind of trash hill in perpetuity. And, you know, it's important engineering work to have good landfills that protect us. But they have to manage the leachate collection, the methane burn off, and we have to manage them for years to come. And instead of throwing away valuable commodities in a landfill that we'll never use again after using them once, it makes much more sense to recycle them. When you put your recycling out at the curb, your hauler will come and pick it up. They'll tip the cart in, they'll cart it off to a material recovery facility. And GFL, Green for Life, the hauler that serves this region, had something come up, so they couldn't be here today, but they wanted me to relay that they run separate routes for trash and recycling, and all of their recycling doesn't go to landfill, it goes to Sunoco, who we're gonna hear from a little bit later on, a recycler. So once it hits the floor, it gets separated and sorted into these giant optical sorters, and people picking out valuable commodities at the front. And once all the materials are sorted, they're sold. Paper goes to a paper mill, aluminum goes to a smelter, glass to a glass furnace. And so all these materials are sorted at the MRF, the material recovery facility, and then sold as commodities. So looking at, you know, that why, as to why we recycle, just some data here is 1 ton of plastic conserves about 3.8 barrels of oil. And when you think about how expensive gas is, it seems to always be going up, right? It's all the more important to recycle our plastic when we think about conserving that commodity. 1 ton of paper conserves about 4.4 tons of lumber. So recycling paper saves about 17 trees. And those trees are carbon sinks. They suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and you know, we can use them for future generations if we recycle more paper. And when we recycle glass, it's about 1 ton of natural resources, because of glass is such a simple product made up of inert materials like sand, soda ash, and limestone. So speaking of glass, we have a glass recycler right down the road from Raleigh in Wilson called Strategic Materials, and they're one of the major glass recyclers in the country, actually. And when they take recycled glass cullet, they don't have to burn their furnace as hot to make new glass. So when you use just sand, you have to really heat that thing up, and it uses 30% less energy when you're using recycled cullet because it's already in that glass form. And so glass, like aluminum, can be recycled in perpetuity over and over again. And aluminum, like glass, can be recycled in perpetuity, and it takes 95% less energy to make a can out of recycled aluminum. Because when you think about aluminum, it's a metal, and you have to extract that from the earth. There's a lot of fossil fuels that go into that extraction process. Then it needs to be shipped to a smelter, and then, you know, burned down. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it's a very energy intensive process. But when we use recycled content, it's much less. It's much more energy efficient. And glass and aluminum are both cans that, if you recycled a can on April 1st, probably in mid-May, it'll be back on the shelf ready to be sold. So that's taking a look at the environmental benefits of recycling. There's also huge economic reasons to recycle, and one is the local markets here in the Carolinas. We have a study that we do, you know, the last one we did in the fall, where we look at our recyclers and where they're shipping their materials to be remanufactured. And in North Carolina, over 50% of all of the materials that are coming out of our homes, like my home in Durham, when I throw a can away, over 50% is staying in the Carolinas, which a lot of the country can't say that. They have to ship it states, several states over, for various reasons. They may not have as many in markets available as we do in the Carolinas. And as a total, over 80% of our recyclables in North Carolina stay in the Southeast to be remanufactured into new products. Even more salient than that, recycling puts food on the table for 15,000 people in North Carolina who have private sector jobs directly tied to recycling. We do this study every 5 years, looking at the employment benefits of recycling, and we just finished this up in November. and we found 15,700 people are directly employed by the private sector for recycling in North Carolina. And that's held pretty steady since 2010, since the implementation of kind of modern recycling systems. The last point that I wanted to make is kind of a to vaunt the recycling program in Brunswick County and the work that Nikki and other local leaders have done. Brunswick County is one of our stellar recyclers in North Carolina. We do a per capita ranking of recycling for all 100 counties every year. And since 2015, Brunswick County has been in the top 10 of all counties in the state. This past year, Brunswick County was the 4th out of 100 counties for per capita recycling. So that's a testament to the work that Mickey has done, a testament to the work that other local government and business leaders have done, like Sunoco down the road. So, great job to y'all. We want to make sure that, that Brunswick County stays at the top. So just another reason to join today. So that's taking a look at some of the environmental and economic reasons about why recycling is important. I'm going to turn things over for a second to my colleague, Sandy Skolachenko, to take a look at some economics for recycling.
Thank you, Matt. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some cost information related to recycling. And I want to start by kind of addressing what happened and what we've probably seen in the news related to China. So in 2017, China made an announcement that they no longer want to be the world's dumping ground. They don't want to continue taking loads of recycling from countries all around the world that is mixed with various levels of trash. So they announced a new policy called National Sword, which went into effect in 2018. And effectively what that did is said, we, China, are no longer taking any mixed loads of paper or plastic. That's from any other country across the world. And if you do have sorted loads of paper and plastic, we're going to make sure that they meet very high quality standards. And so contamination cannot exceed more than 0.5% of a bale of sorted paper or plastic, which is actually a very high bar and hard to achieve. So this really shook up global markets. A lot of countries relied on China to send many of their recyclable materials, but that effectively stopped in 2018. And some people thought in the short term that some other Southeastern Asian countries might start taking more material, but we kind of saw the same thing. Other countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia enacted some of their own import bans and quality standards to control what was coming in. So really, what all this means is that more recyclable material is staying in the US instead of being exported. And that's a good thing, but it definitely shook things up in the short term and is requiring some adjustments to kind of stabilize things again. Next slide. Okay, so this shows you what a clean bale of different types of paper commodities are worth. The price per ton is on the y-axis, and you can see this is 15 years of data just to kind of show you that, recyclables are commodities, and they do fluctuate based on economic trends and a variety of other market forces. So I've marked January 2018 on this chart, which is when China's policy went into effect. And you can see that all three of these paper commodities, newsprint, cardboard, and mixed paper, all dropped in value pretty quickly. The reason is that the US was sending quite a bit of recycled paper to China. And so when that stopped, we all of a sudden have an abundance of supply that's staying here in the US. And simple supply and demand tells us that when supply increases immediately and demand stays the same, you're going to experience a drop in the price. So that's what happened. Now, since 2018, we've seen a flurry of domestic investments to take advantage of this new supply that's staying here. We've had more than 20 announcements in the country of new paper mills or upgrades to existing mills to be able to use more recycled cardboard and paper, but these kind of projects take time. So by mid to late 2020, we've started to see some of these come online, and you can see that prices began to increase, as we moved through 2020, which seems to reflect that growing demand. Next slide. So this is a similar chart, but instead of paper, we're looking at a couple different container values. So we have aluminum and then some different grades of plastic, PET and HDPE, natural and colored prices. And you can see that the impacts from China really didn't affect plastic prices or aluminum prices nearly as drastically as they did paper. And the reason for that is we really weren't as reliant on export markets to manage these materials. As Matt said, we have really strong markets in the Southeast, especially for plastics as compared to other parts of the country. So we were kind of insulated from these global marketplace shifts and just continue to use our local markets for recyclable plastics. Next slide. All right, so what does all that really mean? First, I want to show you what makes up an average ton of commingled recycling in North Carolina. So by weight, this is a breakdown of what's in the recycling cart, and you can see that cardboard and mixed paper make up nearly 50% of recycling. So the drop in value for those two materials have a really big impact on the value of recycling as a whole. I also want to point out the brown slice up at the top, contamination. So 17% by weight of what gets collected in the recycling bin is contamination or non-recyclable material. Things like plastic bags, textiles, styrofoam, other to-go containers that aren't supposed to be in there. Now these things get removed by the MRF, but it does put added strain on their operations. Next slide. So this is the same graph, but instead of percentages, we have prices on here. So it shows you how much each slice of that pie is really worth. So if you remember, cardboard made up 20% of an incoming ton of recyclables. That's 400 pounds. And 400 pounds of cardboard is worth $22.26 in December of 2020. So if you add all these slices together, we get a commingled recycling ton value of $66.99, almost $67. And I'll point out, you'll notice there are two negative value slices in the pie. The first is contamination, that brown slice at the top. Like I said, contaminants get removed by the MRF, but then they have to be sent to the landfill, which of course has a cost associated with that. The other negative value is glass, which is the kind of orangey slice at the bottom. It also has a negative value to the MRF, but it doesn't mean that glass isn't worth anything. It's simply that it needs a lot more cleaning up before it can be ready to be made into a new bottle. So as Matt said, our glass in North Carolina goes to Strategic Materials in Wilson, and so they have to charge to accept it so that they can cover the cost of the additional cleaning and processing that's needed. But the important thing is that glass recycling is a very local and stable market, and so that price really doesn't fluctuate very much. Next slide. Okay, so I told you that this pie adds up to about $67. That's thanks to some price increases that we saw in late 2020. But if we look at the average over all 4 quarters of 2020, our recycling was worth $46.83 on average. And just to compare that to kind of before China, in 2017, the average value for 1 ton of recyclables was $75.47. So we've definitely seen a decrease in the overall value. Next slide. Okay, so how is this impacting recycling costs to local programs? I want to start with the way things used to be, the old model up at the top. So you used to come up with a recycling cost by taking the cost of collection, that's the truck driving down the street and picking up recycling. And then when it's delivered to the MRF, it used to be common to get paid to drop that recycling off. So that payment or revenue helped to offset the collection costs, giving you a pretty cheap cost of recycling. But that model really doesn't apply anymore, and we don't think that's going to come back. So the new model is taking the cost of collection, and then when you drop the recycling off at the MRF, there is a cost or a tipping fee to drop it off. So add these two together, and you get the new increased cost of recycling. But you might be wondering why you're getting charged to drop recycling off if I just told you it was worth $67. The answer is it's not worth $67 in the state that it comes in as. So all the recyclable stuff that gets delivered has to be sorted into individual materials to make those clean bales to sell as commodities. So that's the processing cost you see in the blue circle. Now that we're relying on these domestic markets, the quality standards for the bales of recycling that the MRF creates are much higher. They have to be cleaner, there has to be less contaminants, and this is all a really good thing, creating cleaner and high-value recyclables, but it's a lot harder for the MRF to achieve. They have to slow down their lines, some of them have added more staff, they're investing in equipment upgrades to make those better quality materials. So all of this leads to a higher processing cost, where it may have cost maybe $70, $80 per ton in the past. We're now seeing prices of more like $90 to $100 plus to process 1 ton of recycling. Then we talked about the fact that commodity values are less than what they used to be, even though things do appear to be getting better. You used to be able to make $70 or $80, sometimes even more than $100 per ton of recycling, but now that value is more like in the $40 to $70 per ton range. So in our current situation, it's clear that the cost of processing exceeds the value of material, meaning the MRF has to charge their customers to make up for the difference. One important thing I want to point out is that this new model of the recycling cost is really no different than the model for how we manage and pay for trash. So when you collect trash, you're paying for the cost of collection plus a tipping fee when you take it to the landfill or the transfer station. The difference is when you're paying for trash, you're paying for that material to go into a hole in the ground. When you're paying for recycling, you're really making an investment in the continued life of that material, which supports all the downstream manufacturing and jobs that rely on recycling. Next slide. So now that we know we're dealing with a higher cost of recycling, it's important to think about how to maximize the value and effectiveness of your program. So I just mentioned that recycling is an investment. It's also a service that you as a local government are providing to your residents. And just like any other service, trash, other utilities, that service comes at a cost. And we're seeing more and more local governments increase or establish new recycling fees or solid waste fees that residents pay to cover the cost of these programs. Another thing to remember is that recyclables are commodities that are subject to the forces of supply and demand. Just because the value has decreased doesn't mean that there's not a market. In all of the fluctuation we've seen over the past couple of years, especially with mixed paper, we're not aware of a single MRF in North Carolina that was sending mixed paper to the landfill. It was still being recycled, just not earning as much revenue as in years past. Now, some best practices to get the most out of your curbside recycling programs. Number one is to collect material single stream or commingled with carts. And, from our understanding, all the municipalities in Brunswick County are already doing this. So you're checking that box off, which is great. The second important thing is universal access. meaning that every household gets a recycling cart. And there's a few good reasons for this. First, you're going to have better route density. So when you have everyone participating in the program, you have more stops along the same collection route and more users to split that cost. So you often end up with a cheaper per household collection cost. Now, if you have a sign up or subscription program, you may be inadvertently punishing the households that want to participate by making them pay more for that service. Another important thing is equity of service. So as a reminder, in North Carolina, aluminum cans and plastic bottles are banned from landfill disposal. So by law, they have to be recycled. And we think that local governments should provide that opportunity to every single one of their residents, which also brings me to the final bullet, integrated solid waste management. So recycling is part of managing solid waste, and it should really be just as easy to recycle something as it is to throw it away. The last best practice, which is sort of a segue to the next part of the presentation, is ongoing education to users of your program about how to participate correctly and put the right things in the bin, which is ultimately going to reduce costs. So I'm going to hand things over now to Mel Gillis. She's our education and outreach specialist, and she'll take it from here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Sandy, a whole lot, and Matt, too, and Mickey, and everybody else who came today. Recycling in general, we do a good job, I think, of letting the public know why it's important. And, you know, Matt covered all of this quite a bit already, but the public at this point seems to understand a lot that recycling is something that they want to do, that they need to do, and that it's important because it conserves natural resources, saves energy, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, decreases pollution, saves landfill space, avoids disposal costs in a landfill, and provides jobs. When the public gets this good, positive message from us, we're happy about that. But they also get some misinformation. And our education campaigns have to do a good job, not just in promoting all the benefits of recycling, but also combating some misinformation that's out there. Next slide, please. We have some recycling myths and some recycling truths that are rolling around out there, more myths than truths a lot of the time. One belief is that recycling is either all good or not that important. There's a lot of black and white thinking that goes into recycling sometimes when people don't have all the right information. And the truth is that recycling's not going to save us, and also it's a crucial solid waste strategy. Recycling's important. It is one of the R's. We also have reduce, reuse, refuse, repair, a lot of other things that we can do besides recycle. Recycling matters, and we have to do it. It is part of most municipal solid waste strategies at this point. When I say we have to, I mean that if we ignore it, we still have to do something about that waste. It's going to go to the landfill. It has to be dealt with. So why not recycle it for all the reasons that Sandy and Matt just went over? Another recycling myth is that recycling is supposed to be free. And that came about because for many years, for many residents, it was just sort of built in to cost, and it wasn't as hard to process and as expensive to process. Contamination wasn't as big of an issue. And now, as Sandy just went over, we're finding that it does indeed have a cost, and that the cost of processing the recycling is outweighing the cost of the proceeds from those bales. So we do have a cost for it in the same way that we do for all of the waste that we produce. And coming to grips with that cost is very important, and building that into our accounting. Another myth is that the recycling is all going to the landfill. So we hear this sometimes. It's not the case in North Carolina. As you can see from everything that we've talked about, you know, what does happen is that sometimes people put the wrong thing in the recycling bin, from wishful recycling, or sometimes just not knowing what they're supposed to put in there, because our education could use some improvements, right? So the truth is, it's not all going to the landfill. The stuff that does end up going to the landfill is stuff that belongs there. It's actual trash or contamination, right? And that what we need to do is to stop putting trash into the recycling bin, and we have to get our residents educated about that. The final thing is that many people believe that recycling is very complicated or confusing, that it varies widely from place to place. And the truth is actually the opposite. There's a few reliably recyclable items, about 9 of them. It's a very simple list, and it is very similar from local government to local government, municipality to municipality. What you can recycle is generally just a few items, and getting that message out to the public is very, very important. Next slide, please. So, if we're gonna try to put some positive messaging out about recycling, wonderful, residents like that, we also have to combat some of that misinformation that we were talking about. And we need to address contamination, because that is increasing the cost of recycling, right? Confusion causes contamination. So education is important of our residents. And then we've got to follow up that good education, that good information with appropriate motivation, otherwise known as enforcement. So successful recycling programs take a carrot and stick approach. They pair outreach and education with recycling ordinances and enforcement to reduce contamination. You can, in your community, enact ordinances against recycling contamination, and also institute cart tagging programs. That's the kind of enforcement that's been proven to work the best. And all of that together will really support and enforce the anti-contamination education that you guys are getting out there. And we're glad to assist with that in lots of different ways. Next slide, please. What we see work best, not just in our state and local government recycling programs, but also across the nation, is a few things that we like to recommend. One is that you have a clear list of accepted materials, clear yeses and clear nos, not a bunch of words, but strong images, and that list is made widely available to your public, specifically online. So posting that really good list with lots of good images and not so many words is very important. And then also making it available either through a brochure or some other mailer, like a postcard or a bill insert, and then following all that up, as I just said, with the cart tags is very important, giving people curbside feedback on what they are putting into the bin and whether or not it is working. So getting them to stop putting the trash into their bins is very, very helpful. Next slide, please. We also, at the state, have a series of handouts available. More information is good. These handouts are for all sorts of different folks, for the press, who often has gotten the wrong idea about recycling, for maybe your decision makers in your community, and also for the general public. So we have some talking points. We have a recycling fact sheet that summarizes a lot of what Sandy spoke about today, and Matt. And then we also have a document called Saving Recycling, which helps you and your community walk through some different program adjustments you might make if you are looking at making some program changes. So instead of saying, oh, it's all or nothing, we either have a recycling curbside program or we're going to cut it, going for a more moderate strategy, like looking, if you're picking it up weekly right now, to picking it up every 2 weeks instead. So this Saving Recycling handout can give you sort of a stepwise approach to how to address whatever recycling issues you and your community might be facing if you're looking at program adjustments. Next slide, please. And that brings us to this. So, why are we even having this conversation? Well, clearly residents love recycling. So the public gets that recycling should be a part of a municipal solid waste strategy for all the reasons that we've gone over today. And they don't like to see it go away. The Recycling Partnership found that 84% of people view recycling as a valuable public service. So that's like the majority of Americans think that recycling matters, and even associate it with sort of an American value sort of thing. We've seen evidence of this in North Carolina, in a few municipalities and counties and regions that have thought about cutting their recycling programs in some way. Craven and Currituck definitely come to mind. When communities try to let recycling go, the community often comes back swinging. Residents want to keep it. They're usually willing to take on additional charges for continued recycling service or to take their stuff to a drop-off site. So letting people know about what the potential alternatives are is very, very important. And before you make any changes to your program, definitely consider increasing recycling fees. Next slide, please. If you need any other help from us in supporting your recycling program, we have a whole lot available. There's grant funding. There's, as I already mentioned, ways that we can help you kind of look at how do we reframe our services, or what do we need to do to make some program adjustments. We've definitely got support in looking at your budgets, talking to your decision makers and elected officials and the press. Looking at your contracts and trying to figure out how to change those up a little bit if it's time to do something like that. Of course, we have a wide variety of reducing contamination resources. You can find all of that either on our Facebook page or online at recyclemorenc.org. So a wide variety of things that we can do. If you've got anything that you need to chat about, we are totally here for that. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, just a list of our contact information so that you guys can reach out if you need us. And I think that covers it.
Yep.
And I'll hand it back over to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Yeah, so as Mel said, we have a lot of resources to offer assistance in whatever recycling process our communities want to do, whether that's universal access, or if you decide to move away from that and to have a subscription-based, we want to be involved in that process too, to offer our assistance. You know, our goal is to make sure that recycling is sustainable and happening in whatever capacity. So thanks to Mel. These are our names for us on the call and our contact info. You know, I wanted to make one quick point before we turn this over to Sunoco. Is the CRA offered this platform today, and is another great organization, the Carolina Recycling Association. It's a nonprofit industry group for North and South Carolina. And if you're interested to learn more, they have a conference coming up in May. So we're looking forward to that, and there'll be some sessions that touch on each of these topics. So we're going to hear from Kevin Fisher and from Sunoco Recycling. And Sunoco Recycling is the material recovery facility down the road in New Hanover County that recycles all of the material coming out of Brunswick County. So Kevin, glad you could join us today. Do you want to unmute and take it away?
Thank you, Matt and Deeks, and also the CRA for putting this on. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sunoco, and then I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Walker, who is our manager of our two operations on the coastal. And he's going to talk about our investments on the recycling side and the paper side to improve recycling altogether. So you want to flip to the next slide, please? So I'd like to just kind of let people know who we are overall. Some of you may know who we are, but some of you may not. So overall, we collect about 3 million tons across the U.S. annually. And that's a range from a residential collection process or a commercial collection where we have industrial accounts and pick up bales of cardboard or various types of plastics. We are what we consider vertically integrated with our paper division within Sunoco Products. What does that mean? Well, 65 to 70% of what we process in our recycling plants ends up back in our paper mills. Particularly, we have 3 paper mills in the Southeast, one in Richmond, Virginia, one in Hartsville, South Carolina, and one in Newport, Tennessee. And those paper mills combined have 11 paper machines, and our 20 recycling plants, again in the Southeast, will feed basically raw materials to these paper mills. So ever so important that recycling stays with us in North Carolina and in South Carolina, because we need this feedstock that's generated at the curb or at the home to supply raw materials to our paper mills. It's ever so important. You know, our 20 recycling plants are primarily made in the Carolinas, and then obviously our paper mills in the region here. So we'll take it from we'll process it from the home to our recycling facility to a paper mill, and then make a new product out of it. As you see in that bottom right-hand corner, that's textile cores that we make. We're also, y'all are familiar with Pringles containers. We make those. If you want to flip to the next slide, Matt, please. Just to kind of level set our coastal operations here, we have 2 facilities in the area. Y'all are familiar with the Wilmington operation, and then we have our Jacksonville, North Carolina operation. Total, we process about 8,000 tons a month, and a majority of that is going to be a curbside collection program that GFL brings to us, or other small waste haulers, or in municipalities they'll bring to one of our 2 facilities. It's about 90% out of the 8,000 tons is a residential program. The other 10% is what we consider our commercial side of the business. Difference between the 2 operations, we don't really sort our containers in the Wilmington operation. What we're going to do is ship those to our Jacksonville facility and do the sorting there, where we have optical sorters and do some hand sorting. So the fibers sorted in Wilmington, but then the containers and additional fibers is sorted in Jacksonville. And you can see in the green, this is really our footprint for which counties or municipalities bring in material to us. If you want to go to the next slide, Matt. You know, we talked about jobs, we talked about investments in some previous slides. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Walker, who manages our 2 facilities, and he's going to talk about some of our investments that we have upcoming this year.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So what Kevin's speaking to is the FiberMax, which is an optical sorter that we just put into Onslow last week. So pretty much that's a $500,000 investment there that Sunoco made with the help of a grant as well from NCDQ. So what we did there is optical sorter was put in on the fiber line. So as Sandy was speaking about earlier, with some of these controls that have been put in place on fiber and contamination rates, either send to export or domestically, we've seen them both where they're wanting at least 2% or lower on contamination within each bale. So what we're trying to do is get our paper in line with what those are, and be able to sell it export again to some of those markets that are still taking it. India, Vietnam, just to speak of a few, and then obviously to fill our own paper mills with obviously clean material. So what we did is we put in that FiberMax there in Onslow, and what it does is it pulls all the non-fiber, so your plastics and aluminum and steel, bags, things of that nature, pulls that all out of the paper by doing over 1,000 picks a minute, so that you just have clean finished good paper there. Very minimal post sorting. We have 2 people there post sorting that paper, pulling anything that FiberMax may have missed. And before the FiberMax was implemented, we had 8 people standing there trying to do that. So the FiberMax was a huge help there. As Kevin spoke to before as well, the containers that are sent to Wilmington, so all the non-fiber is sent to Jacksonville. So we have to run that separately through the plant, and it takes a little bit more time to make sure that we don't miss any and we get the highest capture rate that we can. So by adding in this FiberMax, we're able to run more efficiently and improve that capture rate substantially. The next process or the project to talk about is the Hartsville paper mill. They're doing roughly $118 million project there. It's called Project Horizon. What they're doing is we have the number 10 paper machine, which is the biggest paper machine in Hartsville, does roughly 600 tons a day of material, OCC and some fiber there. And what they're going to do is rebuild that machine, put state-of-the-art cleaning on it, and then they're going to build the largest recycled paper machine in the world as well. So they're putting all that into place now. It should be done in the next year, maybe year and a half. So they're making a lot of headway there, getting it installed. And the big piece there is you're going to improve number 10's ability to process material, because you're going to have the state-of-the-art cleaning. You're going to obviously add the new machine that's going in there. It's going to be the largest recycled paper machine in the world. And then we're going to get rid of using wood chips in our recycling process there at the paper mill. So we have a forestry division. We're still going to keep those trees and things of that nature from what I've been told. But the big piece there is that we're going to move to 100% recyclable. So no more wood chips being added to that paper. Usually it's about a 60-40 mix. So it's going to all move to 100% recycled material there. So it kind of hits on some of those pieces that Matt talked about earlier with the recycling 1 ton of material saves 17 trees, things of that nature. So we're pushing very hard in that area as well on our end. And then obviously you're going to drive the demand on paper. So when you have the number 10 machine being added in, getting that cleaned up, and then adding the new piece of machinery there in Hartsville, there's going to be a higher demand for mixed paper and a higher demand for OCC. Right now, they keep about 3 days worth of material on hand at any given time, 3 to 4 days, and they're going to have excess of 8 days of material on hand after this project's implemented. So they're going to need a lot more material. It's going to drive demand up. You're going to see demand driven up on mixed paper, where you saw Sandy Source talking about some of that pricing. Once China backed out of the market, we flooded the domestic market with paper. So obviously that drove demand down there. So drove pricing down as well. So hopefully when we add this new machine in and we get these cleaning processes put in place in Hartsville, it's going to drive that demand up exponentially, so that we can see that pricing come back and hopefully help out on the pricing structure as a whole. Kevin, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to hit on there.
No, Matt, you just flip to the last slide, please. Okay, this is what Daniel was talking about, and just want to point out the bottom section there. We heard about 20 new paper mills or upgrades of paper mills across the U.S. coming online here, and there's ones close into Virginia, Maine, but here's what Sunoco's doing. This is our investment, well over $100 million investment to reconfigure our number 10 paper machine. And again, that's going to drive up the demand for cardboard, and that's a lot of that cardboard is going to be shipped from the Wilmington and Jacksonville facilities, and we're going to do away with the wood chips, as Daniel spoke about before. So a lot of good investments by our company, and as Daniel spoke before, our company is allowing our division to have investments also by upgrading our equipment to sort additional or capture additional material at our MRFs. That's all I have, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Kevin and Daniel. Always good to hear from y'all. I'm pretty impressed with some of the investment going into Sunoco over the next couple of years. So that's the end of the formal presentation and information that we wanted to share with everybody today. But we did have a couple of questions come in, and if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to type them in that chat box, and we can try and address them as best as possible. So I noticed John had a question about how does the recycling cost compare to landfill fees? And Sandy, since you touched on recycling costs, I was wondering if you wanted to kind of elaborate on how does the recycling costs compare to landfill fees?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a tough question to answer because it depends on where you are. But on average, I saw this question come in and I pulled up the average landfill tipping fee in North Carolina. And in fiscal year 1920, it was $44 at the landfill. So we've seen recycling costs be comparable to that. We've seen in some places recycling costs being higher than that. But I think more frequently we're seeing models with adjustable pricing where it's very transparent what the MRF's processing cost is, and then they will be willing, maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis, to subtract whatever value they're able to get from the recycling. So it's sort of a variable cost structure that we're starting to see more of. So that means, it probably will change with time, and hopefully with these market values increasing like we've seen in late 2020, we hope those will continue into 2021, making the price of recycling, even more appealing and more comparable with trash instead of being more expensive. I don't know if anyone from Sunoco wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. That we are seeing the value of the materials increase as you noted below, and are moving away from actually going to a reward our customers when the markets are good, but unfortunately share in the cost when the markets aren't so good. But probably since this time last year, the values just continue to improve, and that's overall good for the industry, good for this region, Brunswick County, and we expect to see this trend continue. Again, I'll go back to the 20 new paper mills and upgrades that are happening in the U.S. That's going to drive the demand up for the material, and then at the same time drive up the price of the material.
Absolutely, agreed. Thanks, Kevin. Good answer, Sandy. Okay, Gifford also had a few questions for us, and I think Mel, you might be kind of the best person to talk about tagging. But Gifford asked what community in North Carolina has an effective enforcement and tagging program, and is it the local government or the hauler that is doing the enforcement? Mel does a lot of work on tagging, and actually a lot of you have probably worked with her about it. So Mel, if you have a good answer for that, put you on the spot.
Sure. Yeah, I think the first answer is lots of communities in North Carolina are doing effective tagging programs. The first two that come to mind is Charlotte's been doing one for a long time, and Greensboro did a real effective one a couple of years back. But there are smaller communities of all sizes are doing them. If you wanted to see some good information on the data around cart tagging programs, the Recycling Partnership has some fantastic information out there about how they did that in Atlanta and a few other places across the country, again, of various sizes. So they work in large communities, small communities, and everything in between. As to whether or not the local government or the hauler does the tagging, it can be anything from the local government to the hauler to those working together in partnership. So I wouldn't say there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. We did a little cart tagging webinar in the fall, I think, not so long ago, through CRA, I believe. So that we could definitely make that available to you if you wanted to hear from other communities who have done it. And we have a cart tagging 101 handout that's also available. So lots of different things to support it. And I think figuring it out for your community is often not as big a deal as we think. There are some simple steps to take to implement it.
Thanks, Mel. We had a couple more questions. So one just came in from John. He says, not aware it is against the law to landfill glass and aluminum. How are these removed when commingled? So Sort of correct. So aluminum cans and plastic bottles are banned from landfill disposal, which means they have to be recycled. Glass is banned from landfill disposal for ABC permit holders. So people that have beer and liquor licenses, like a restaurant or a bar, they have to find a way to recycle their glass because there's such an immense quantity of that material that they have available. But for residential sector, the plastic bottles and aluminum cans go to a material recovery facility like Sunoco, where they have very expensive equipment that will help sort those bottles and cans out to be recycled. I don't, obviously Kevin and Daniel will have better information about how their own facility works, but when they're commingled, they get separated at the material recovery facility by machines that sell them, that sort them out, and then they can be sold downstream to a metal manufacturer or a plastic manufacturer.
Matt, this is Daniel with Sunoco. I'll give you just like a quick, I guess, explanation on how the process works as a whole. But it comes in, like Matt said, as commingled. So all the materials mixed together. We'll take that material with a front end loader and dump that material into what's called a metering drum, and it's got a big steel metering wheel on it with some sort of, let's call it, teeth on it that carry open bags and things of that nature. But that job of that metering drum is to meter the material onto the first belt evenly so that it can be hand sorted through. So it'll go through that metering bin, hit the first belt, and then make it up to what we call the pre-sort. So the job of the hand sorters there is to pull out all the trash, big pieces of steel or metal, so they don't jam up in the machines, and then large plastic jugs and things like that that are going to go, that'll end up in the cardboard or the paper due to the make of the screens. So after the material goes through the pre-sort and it gets clean from the trash, big pieces of steel and metal, wood, things of that nature, it falls into what's called an OCC screen. OCC screen's on the top and the glass breakers are below. So it hits the OCC screen, all the large pieces of OCC will ride over that OCC screen and be taken out of the process right at the front end. All your paper, bottle, glass, steel, aluminum will fall through that OCC screen and hit what's called a glass breaker. Glass breaker is just a row of discs, steel discs. It's probably about 15 rows of them all together. So those discs bang together, break the glass up, pull the glass out through the bottom, and then the glass exits the plant and goes through what's called a cyclone, where it pulls all the little pieces of plastic and paper and little pieces of bags out of the glass to make the glass as clean as possible, to give it to strategic, like we spoke about earlier. Everything else will ride over the top of the glass breaker, hit what's called a polishing screen. Its job is 2D over the top, 3D off the back end. So your paper is supposed to ride up over the top. And then all your bottles, cans, aluminum, non-fiber is supposed to come off the back end of that screen. So then when your paper goes over the top at our plant, it hits the fiber max. So any other non-fiber that went over the top of the screen will get shot on, get pulled out. Your paper will then be pulled out. It's clean. Everything else goes to non-fiber, where it will go through the Aladdin, which is another optical sorter. That piece of machinery will shoot on PET. So your number one plastics. So it'll shoot on all those, pull those directly out of the system. The material will then come back around where we'll pick milk jugs, so HDPE natural, and then your HD color, and then any PET that was missed by the optical sorter. It will then go under a steel magnet belt where it'll pull all the steel. And then the last line of defense is the eddy current, which is like a negatively magnetic field that throws aluminum cans. So you'll see trash and aluminum sort of riding across this belt, and then the aluminum cans will just get flicked over into a blower where it's sucked up and blown into a bunker where we can bail it up later on. So that's a really high level overview of sort of how the process works, if that helped at all.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Glad you could join. You have the technical know-how that we really need. So Gifford is asking about rising costs from local haulers, and you know, I might pose this to our Sunoco partners here is you know, maybe to speak on this a little bit. But he's saying that some residents say that they are dropping recycling service due to GFL's rising costs, and wonder if DEQ knows if all recyclable haulers in North Carolina are raising prices to government entities. I can only speak very generally on this. I would say kind of across the board, because processing costs have gone up for recycling, those have been passed on to haulers who bring in the materials to the MRFs, and then that has to be passed on to the residences. So I would say, generally speaking, yes, pretty much across the board, the fees to collect recycling have increased from haulers to local governments. You know, without knowing the specifics of exactly how many dollars have increased for each community, but I would say yes, in general, that has been the trend. I think that kind of touches pretty much all the questions that were asked. If I missed anything, forgive me. Happy to discuss after this. Let's go back to our contact information. We're happy to talk anytime. This is what we do. We work out recycling problems, looking at analysis, and you know, looking at cost information too. So if you have any questions, please direct them to myself, Wendy, Sandy, Mel. I even believe Tara and Kara are on here, and they're part of our team too. So I really appreciate everyone's time today. I'm glad that we got to make this happen. And we'll be able to share this presentation and the recording. And if I see some follow-up questions coming in about specifics, I'll be sure to reach out to y'all to talk about those. But really, thanks to Mary and the CRA for lending us the GoToMeeting platform, and of course to Mickey for helping organize and get everybody on the same page to meet today. Thanks again. I'm going to stop talking. I'm sure everyone's heard enough from me with all the emails and flurry of emails I've been sending about this. But thanks again. Looking forward to reaching out about specific questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.